Hey everyone, Clinton Griffiths here in the Ag Web Studios in South Bend, Indiana, after a week-long tour of farm country on the 2019 ProFarmer Midwest Crop Tour. It's been quite the week. We have the numbers from ProFarmer. Now, just so everyone knows, these numbers are not Crop Tour numbers. These are the numbers that ProFarmer will pull out and make their own number using Crop Tour data, and we'll get the guys over there to explain that here in just a minute. But let's get to the numbers. Corn. USDA or ProFarmer coming out with a corn yield of 163.3, a total production of 13.358 billion bushels. Now, how does that compare to USDA? USDA, they were at 169.5 in their August report at a 13.875 billion bushel crop. Let's jump over to soybeans and look at that number. This one from ProFarmer. This is what they came up with. A 3.497 billion bushel crop with an average yield of 46.1 bushels per acre. You can see that's quite different from USDA's number in August at 48.5 and a 3.845 billion bushel crop. All right, I've got Chip Flory and Brian Grete, editor of ProFarmer, joining me now to talk about the numbers and the results. And Brian, let's start with you. These numbers are the ones that you use based on Crop Tour information, but these aren't the same numbers. Explain for us.
Fields, we pull out the samples, we come out, we tabulate them, and then we put them into our spreadsheets, average them up, and they give us averages by crop district and state there. And then at the end of the week, obviously here, we have made these ProFarmer estimates using the Crop Tour data, but we also use other factors. Maturity of the crop was a big one this year. Any acreage changes that we made, how we think the crops will finish, areas outside of where we sampled on Crop Tour, those all come into play. And those are the ProFarmer estimates not associated with Crop Tour.
Now, if we look at these, what were the biggest factors in trying to pull these numbers together? Was there was it maturity? I mean, that was a big issue we saw when we were out on the eastern leg. What was the overall factors that helped get to and arrive at these numbers?
Well, I think maturity was the key because we sampled crops that were anywhere from behind to well behind normal. And that was pretty much universal across the Corn Belt. The biggest differences, obviously, in maturity were in the far eastern Corn Belt, Ohio, Indiana, parts of Illinois. South Dakota was an immature crop there as well. When we got into Iowa and Nebraska, they were a little bit more mature, but I wouldn't say anything was more advanced than what it normally would be.
You know, that's true. The maturity factor is critical, but the all samples average, when we put all the Crop Tour samples into one spreadsheet, calculate one average yield off of all the samples, that was down 6.9% from what we had a year ago.
Right, and that's always the best number that we have coming out of Crop Tour.
Right.
When we take all roughly 1,500 samples, put them all together, average them up, and it turns the Corn Belt into one big cornfield. Is what it does basically.
Chip, as you hear these numbers and take a look at what the finals are, how does that strike you? And I know you talk markets every day. How does that strike you compared to what USDA came out with in August?
Well, that 13.9 billion bushel number that we got from USDA back on August 12 was about what, 700 million bushels above the average trade guess?
Yes.
Well, here we are at 13.36. We're not quite that 700 million bushels below. We're getting close. We're getting close to that. But this, I think, is still just a little bit above what the trade was expecting on average ahead of that August 12 report. I don't know what the trade expectations are right now, but I think this lines up pretty well with those expectations, a whole lot better than that 13.9 number did.
Yeah, obviously USDA's August estimate came in much higher than anticipated and stirred the markets, stirred emotions and everything else.
As you look at soybeans, fellas, let's talk about that a little bit from a final number standpoint. Compare that with where ProFarmer is versus where USDA was in August.
Well, the pod counts simply weren't there. I mean, they were awful, to be honest with you. Eastern Corn Belt, down huge amounts year over year. Now, keep in mind, last year was a heavily potted soybean crop across the Corn Belt. This year's a very low potted soybean crop across the Corn Belt. We did see some flowering out there. There's some potential to add some pods late in the season if we get ideal weather, but it's going to need rain. It's going to need extra time. And even with that, it's a subpar soybean crop this year.
Right. That's right. And it's all about planting date here. When we got late, once the delays really started to mount up and guys were getting a little, not a little, getting concerned about getting a crop in the ground, the corn market started to move to the upside. The bean market followed along, but it was underperforming compared to what was going on with the corn market. Guys that have got two planters, one to run corn, one to run soybeans at the same time, the beans came out of the planter and corn went in late as we got closer and closer to the end of June. That pushed those bean plantings back even further for some producers. And the lateness of the planting, it is really showing up in the development of the plant, the branching of the plant, the node set, the node placement was not bad. It was better than what I thought that we were going to see out there. So the plant is performing like a late planted bean crop should be expected to perform.
Yeah, they almost look like double crop soybeans in some cases, and that may be how they end up yielding as well.
Yeah, in Ohio, we found, and ProFarmer put the number at 39 bushels per acre, pretty low compared to what we saw last year, and really pretty low. But a lot of that is potential, as we saw there. Talk, fellas, about how potential kind of factors into these numbers, because we do this every year. We do it in August. We go out on crop tour, but there's still weeks left here of this growing season. What do you guys think?
Right. The more immature the crop is, the more potential you're measuring, as opposed to last year when we measured more realized yield at that point. Yeah. We knew kind of how much it was going to hold on to. We just didn't know exactly the very end of the growing season. This year, there's still a lot of growing season left, or we hope there is. If there isn't, then we've got other problems. But when it's more of a challenge when the crops are immature.
Chip, do you think that this number starts to change at all as we get into subsequent reports from USDA or go throughout the growing season?
I think our number may change.
Yeah.
It's because of the immaturity of the crop. You've got to stay nimble with your expectations on the supply side. It's weather conditions are going to have a major impact from this point forward on how both the corn and the soybean crop are going to finish. So you got to stay nimble. Based on what we know right now at 1:30 on August 23rd,
I think that's what day
August 23rd. At 1:30 on August 23rd, based on what we know, that's the best estimate that we can put on the corn and soybean crops. Is it going to change? I would almost guarantee it. Almost guarantee it.
And that's a good point, Chip, that you made. This is, honest to God, what we believe right now the crop size is. And it could change.
Yeah.
Depending on when the growing season ends. If the growing season ends early, then it's going to change. If the growing season is extended, then it's likely to change. And so that's the process there. USDA gets to go back every month and adjust their estimates. We don't have that luxury. That's part of the reason we put a plus or minus 1% on the corn and plus or minus 2% on the soybeans. Now, with that said, if something dramatic happens one way or the other, we can always go back and adjust and leave that plus or minus percentages on those crops.
Right. The 1% on corn at either side of 163.3 gives us a range of 161.7 to 164.9. The 2% on soybeans is 45.2 up to 47 bushels per acre. But I want to stress 163.3 is what we think it is.
Right. Those are the estimates.
Yeah. But we put that range on there so that people understand, hey, it's the third week of August. Things are going to change.
Yeah. Would you characterize the number as, and maybe this isn't the right way to characterize it, I'm just asking guys, but would you call it, this is like a max yield potential for corn? Or, because we know that soybeans have more developing to do. There are pods out there, there's more flowering, you know, they could put on more. But on corn, seeing corn in blister stage and so immature, is this a max potential? Or is that a fair question?
No, it's
a very fair question.
Yeah, anything's a fair question.
Yeah.
But, they are what we believe it will be.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would say that that's what the ranges are for. The maximums is the top end of those ranges right now. As we sit here in the third week of August.
And I'll caution, if it's perfect from this point forward, and the next 5 weeks are exactly what the corn crop needs, don't underestimate it if the weather is perfect, because it will improve. It will improve. We're assuming that we are going to lose some production out of South Dakota. We made a bit of an assumption on that on Ohio, but South Dakota, we pulled her down.
Tough conditions out there this year. All right, so we're just about out of time here, but if you guys were going to give us your final thoughts from the 2019 ProFarmer Midwest Crop Tour. Brian, we'll start with you. Your overall impression of this year's tour and kind of what you're going to take away from what you saw out in the field.
Well, we knew that the crops were immature coming into Crop Tour, and that's exactly what we found. What we didn't know was that the ear counts were going to be down and down as dramatically as they were in some of these 7 states that we sampled, and that the pod counts were going to be as low as they were. So that's the big takeaways. These numbers are driven by ear counts and pod numbers being down so much.
And Chip, what about you?
I'm not going to take anything away from what Brian just said. I'll ditto that.
All right. Well, Chip, then where do we go from here over the next 6 weeks?
Oh, boy. Over the next 6 weeks with the crop or with the markets?
Let's start with the markets.
With the markets. Okay. Going to be a lot of attention paid to the weather and the how this crop finishes. No question about that. If we've got a string of cool conditions, cloudy conditions that continue to delay the development of the corn and the soybean crop, I think the market starts to perform a little bit better. We find the low. I'm not saying that the market starts to go up. If we go through that kind of a finish, a cool finish that doesn't allow it to be everything that it can be, both the corn and the soybean crop. Mm-hmm. I think once the combines start to roll and we start to see some of the weight of the crop, I think the market starts to respond once the combines roll. But it's going to take that, isn't it?
Yeah, it's going to take time. These years where the crops are pushed back so much, it just takes the market a long time to realize what actual crop size is, and so a harvest time rally isn't out of the question.
Well, it was a pretty exciting tour, a lot of fun. We always enjoy all the people that are out on tour and getting to spend time with the scouts and going to the meetings and meeting all the folks that are kind of following along the entire way. Of course, this year's social media was kind of wild. We had a lot of followers on Twitter and Facebook kind of going along with us. Thank you both for being here and sharing that information. Of course, we all appreciate it. And if anybody wants to see more of these numbers, of course, they can go to ProFarmer.com and get on and take a look. Brian, Grete, Chip, Flory will be talking on AgriTalk coming up here in just a little bit. And of course, agweb.com is where we'll be tracking all of these stories. And if you'd like to see a roundup and a kind of an overall overview of what the tour's been like, we're going to have a special on Ag Day on Monday, and then this weekend, U.S. Farm Report. We'll be covering the tour extensively as well. So just a lot of things to talk about, a lot of the tour to mention. It was just a great week, guys. Thank you so much for your time, and we appreciate everybody tuning in and joining us for this live reveal of the 2019 ProFarmer Midwest Crop Tour numbers.